welcome back. All right, yes, I am wearing the brand new Tampa Bay Lightning jersey. I got this one, of course, from Ben H Sports. And yeah, I thought kind of fun to wear. And considering the subject matter for this video, it seems suiting. But yeah, this is a really, really nice jersey, just for anybody who might be curious. I was actually surprised. I like it more in person than I thought I would. So 3 of the 7 teams that are on this board here will make the playoffs. Which 3? Well, that's where it gets kind of curious. Now, what's interesting is the models at this point seem to state that the teams that are above the playoff line should stay there. Should. Philadelphia is seen widely as the one that is most susceptible to falling out of the playoffs. I'd love to see them make the playoffs. I honestly would. I want to see Philadelphia make it. I think that the amount of hard work they've put in this season, it would be a shame if they didn't make it. Really would. They bust their you-know-whats every night. So, yeah, there's that. But we'll start with Detroit. Now, Detroit, to me, is not really in danger, but they're 7 points clear of the playoff line. They have 70 points in 58 games. They have 22 regulation wins. Keep in mind the regulation wins is the tiebreaker for who does or doesn't make the playoffs. And it's right in the middle in terms of how many regulation wins any of the teams have on the board. They're, of course, the number 1 wild card. They have 9 of their 24 remaining games, by my count, I will say by my count, against teams that are currently in the playoffs. Now, that can be tricky. In some cases, you might be against a team late in the season. Maybe they're resting star players. Maybe they're having a bit of a lull because their position in the playoffs is already decided. So that's not necessarily, at this time of year, the best way to measure who has the toughest time of it and who has the easiest time of it. But it is worthy of note. They have 3 games against Buffalo. That should favor Detroit, but Buffalo's been better lately. They also have 3 games against Washington. So starting with tonight's game against the Capitals, they can make it really difficult for the Caps to make the playoffs, or they could give them hope. So if the Capitals beat them tonight and do it in regulation, that would put them 5 points back of Detroit with a game in hand. So it's not insurmountable. It's unlikely, but it's not insurmountable. And at home, they have 11 games. Away, they have 13. Their record at home is a little bit better than the record on the road. They have 17-8-5 as their home record, 15-12-1 as their road record. They're good at both. It's just they're a little better at home than on the road. Looking at their upcoming schedule, their next 3 are at home. Then they go on a 3-game road trip out west. Colorado and Vegas are part of that road trip as well. That will not be easy. It's a 4-game road trip because then they're in Buffalo. They come back home for 2. It's interesting that they play Arizona twice, meaning they haven't played Arizona yet. Then they're at Pittsburgh. They come back home to play Columbus, the Islanders. They go on the road to play Nashville, Washington, Carolina, Florida, and Tampa. That road trip has really hurt some teams over the year. So that is kind of this season's nightmare road trip right there, is the Nashville, Washington, Carolina, Florida, Tampa. It feels like any mix of those 5 teams on the road, you could have a tough time. So Detroit needs to win games before they reach that road trip. I think they will. I think they should be fine. But if they're near the line when they get to that 5-game road trip, it could get dicey quickly. And then they come back home. They play the Rangers, Buffalo, Capitals. And then they go on the road to play Pittsburgh and Toronto before having a home-and-home to end the season against Montreal. So again, with the home-and-home against Montreal, you have to think they'd at least win one of those 2. They should be in good shape to make the playoffs. We shall see. Money Puck has them at 77% odds of making the playoffs. The Athletic has them at 70%. Hockey Reference, very bullish on them, 92.7% according to Hockey Reference. Now we'll talk about Tampa Bay. They have 69 points in 60 games. They've played more games than everybody else on the board. They also have more regulation wins than everybody else on the board with 28. They are the number 2 wild card. 9 of their 22 remaining games are against playoff teams. They have 2 against Toronto. That should be fascinating. Toronto could make it difficult for them if Toronto wins both of those. And they have 2 against Montreal as well. Now, again, they're the number 2 wild card. Their upcoming schedule, they're at Philadelphia today, and then they come home. They play Buffalo, Montreal, Calgary, Philadelphia, the Rangers. So that's a pretty decent homestand right there for Tampa. Tampa, a very good team at home. They're 18-8-3 at home, where they have 12 of their remaining games, and they're 14-15-2 away from home, where they have 10 of their remaining games. So more games at home than on the road should benefit them. But then they go out west. They play at Florida and then go out to Vegas, San Jose, LA, Anaheim. Now that could get fascinating because we've seen teams this year struggle with that 3 time zone difference going out west and being a bit sluggish. You can't have that when you're going out to California and Vegas. Then they come home, they play Boston, the Islanders, Detroit, before going back on the road to play Toronto, Montreal, and Pittsburgh. At home, they're against Columbus and Ottawa. Then they go to Washington, and they're at home against Buffalo and Toronto to finish out the season. So it's not an overly difficult schedule, and according to Money Puck, they have an 85.3% chance of making the playoffs. The Athletic has them at 75%, and Hockey Reference has them at 73.4%. All right, and that brings us to the Flyers. The Flyers, 67 points in 59 games. They are third in the Metro, but you do see 67 points does put them behind both wildcard teams in terms of points. So yes, that would be the target for teams below the playoff line. And with injuries currently, they might be seen as more vulnerable there too. 22 regulation wins for the Philadelphia Flyers this season. Of their 23 remaining games, 12 of them against teams above the playoff line, which means, again, you can view it as being more difficult, or you can view it as, well, those teams might be home and cooled by that time. But 2 of their games are against Florida, 2 of them are against Boston. I didn't see anybody they play 3 times in this schedule. And they're at home against Tampa, and then they go on the road against Washington before coming back home, playing Ottawa and St. Louis. They go out on the road to Florida and Tampa. So again, those road trips to Florida are tough. They come home and play San Jose, Toronto, go out to Boston, come back home to Toronto, go out on the road again to Carolina, come home against Boston and Florida before going on the road to the Rangers and Montreal. They come home against Chicago, the Islanders. They go on the road against Buffalo, Columbus, Montreal, and the Rangers. And then they come home and they play Buffalo and Washington. So one benefit to their schedule, I think, is there's no long road trips or long homestands, really. This is a very balanced schedule, so it shouldn't be too taxing from that perspective. But again, with Konechny being out, I don't think he's playing tonight either. He's missed the last couple of games. Obviously, they're going to miss Drysdale. Ristolainen's on IR. It'll be interesting to see how they respond to all of this. Now, at home, their record's 14, 13, and 2. 12 of the remaining games are at home. On the road, they're 16, 9, and 5, and only 11 of the remaining games are on the road. So it will be interesting to see how this works out for them. Money Puck gives them a 53.4% chance of making the playoffs. The Athletic has them at 46%. Hockey Reference, 59.6%. So they're far more bullish on all 3 teams staying above the playoff line than the others. So we get to below the playoff line, and we get to Washington. 63 points in 57 games. The first thing that stands out is they have games in hand on the teams they're chasing. The exact same situation Pittsburgh's in, because Pittsburgh and Washington are always tied together at the hip this year. 21 regulation wins for the Capitals, so that is lower on the board than almost anybody, the exception being the New York Islanders there, because the Islanders, every game starts in overtime. But 14 of their 25 remaining games are against playoff teams for the Capitals. 2 against Winnipeg, 2 against Boston. So they haven't played Winnipeg at all yet this season, and Winnipeg has had their struggles off and on too. They should not be an easy opponent for Washington. They have 12 games left at home, 13 away from home. At home, they're 15, 9, and 5. Away from home, they're 12, 12, and 4. So again, it starts with them in Detroit. Then they come home, they play Philadelphia and Arizona. Those are 2 potentially winnable games, and that game against Philly clearly will have a lot of eyeballs on that. I'm assuming that'll be on a Thursday. Then they're in Pittsburgh. They come back home and play Chicago. They go out on the road and play Winnipeg. Then they come home, they're still on the road to play Edmonton, Seattle, Vancouver, and Calgary. So that's a 5-game road trip that could decide the season for the Capitals right there. And that is a 5-game road trip that teams have struggled with. And so we'll see how that goes. It feels like going to either the very western teams or the very eastern teams is where teams struggle. So we'll see how things go for the Capitals on that road trip, but then they come home, they play Boston, they go to Buffalo, they come home and play Pittsburgh, they go to Carolina, come home and play Ottawa. So there's a bit of yo-yoing there. Then they go to Detroit, Buffalo, they play at home against Tampa Bay and Boston, and then they go to Philly. So again, that Western Canadian road trip, which also includes a stop in Seattle, I feel like that'll be the season for the Caps. If they can win 3 out of the 5 on that road trip, they will be in good shape and should stay in the hunt. And that could be trouble for the Philadelphia Flyers. Money Puck doesn't like their odds, 16%. The Athletic also doesn't at 15%. And Hockey Reference has them at 12.8%. So the Caps, despite their recent winning ways, not winning a lot of the models over. Then New Jersey, 62 points in 58 games, 24 regulation wins. So for regulation wins, they're ahead of everybody on the board, not Tampa. The problem is they're not winning often enough, and 12 of 24 games remaining are against playoff teams, 3 against Toronto. So the Leafs could snuff out New Jersey's hopes of making the playoffs. They have 2 against the New York Rangers as well. It's not an easy schedule. They're at San Jose, at Anaheim, at LA. So they've got the California swing. Then they come home and play Florida, St. Louis, Carolina. So that's, again, that 3-hour swing there. Then they go to New York, play the Rangers. They play in Dallas. They play at Arizona and at Vegas. So they have a Western swing, and then they come home for a couple, and then they start in the East, but they were doing another Western swing after that. Then they come home, they play Pittsburgh and Winnipeg and the Ottawa Senators before going on the road to play the Islanders, Toronto, and Buffalo. They come back home to play Pittsburgh. They go to New York and play the Rangers. They play Ottawa as well. Then they come home and play Nashville, Toronto. Go to Toronto, so that's a home and home there. And then they're in Philly before they finish their season at home against the New York Islanders. So a game that could potentially be deciding who does or doesn't make the playoffs. So they have 10 games left at home, but they're 14, 15, and 2 at home. So the fact they have 14 games on the road could work to their benefit. They're 15, 10, and 2 on the road. They're a better road team than home team, and 4 extra games on the road, maybe that gets them above the line. Again, they're only 5 points back of the Flyers. They're 7 points back of Tampa with 2 games in hand on Tampa. So we'll see. Money Puck doesn't like their odds, 12.4%. The Athletics more bullish on them at 25%. Hockey Reference, 14.6%. Personally, it's the first time that a team I've picked to win a Stanley Cup in October has missed the playoffs, if that's how that works, which I'm fine with. Next year, I'll just take San Jose. I'll cut out the middleman. But New Jersey's been one of the more disappointing, frustrating teams this season, and I know if you're a Devils fan, you're probably nodding along. And it is the one thing that just it really just bites with New Jersey is there's so many of these games they would have won with good goaltending. And it just feels like, while I understand Tom Fitzgerald's done a really good job in a lot of ways, never fixed the goaltending. And now it feels like it's probably too late. Like if you had Markstrom, do they win enough games down the stretch to actually make the playoffs? What do you do? So the New York Islanders, 62 points in 58 games as well. But as I previously stated, with 16 regulation wins, they've got the lowest number on the board there. 12 of their 24 remaining games against teams above the playoff line currently. 3 games against the Rangers, so that's going to be fun. And they have 2 games against Detroit, so they have a chance to at least pull themselves a little bit closer to Detroit. And the Rangers could very well decide the Islanders' fate. If you're a Rangers fan, you're like, that's the way we want it, right? So they start with a game in Detroit, then they come home and play Boston and St. Louis. They go on the road to San Jose, Anaheim, LA, and then Buffalo. That's quite the road trip, going from LA to Buffalo. And then they come home, they play Ottawa before they go back on the road to New York. So they go to the New York Rangers. It's not a huge road trip there. Then they come home and they play Carolina. They go to Detroit. They come home and play Winnipeg. New Jersey, they play at Florida, at Tampa Bay, at Philadelphia. So they've got the 2 Florida games in there. They come home and play Chicago. Then they play in Columbus. Play at home against Nashville, the Rangers, Minnesota before they go to play at New York against the Rangers, at New Jersey as well, and then they're home against Pittsburgh. So daunting schedule, not hugely, as long as they're able to win those games against the Rangers. They could very well find themselves in decent shape. That being said, they have 11 games left at home where they're 13, 8, and 9, 13 away from home where they're 11, 12, and 5. So they just need to find ways to win more games in overtime. Every Islander game is going to go to overtime, so they need to find a way to win those 3-on-3 battles and win those shootouts as well. Money Puck doesn't like their odds, 6.6%. The Athletic does like their odds, 28%. Hockey Reference, less bullish, but a little more bullish than Money Puck at 12.5% chance of making the playoffs. The Islanders, it's a tough go. It's interesting how many of these teams are playing against Winnipeg, showing that the Winnipeg Jets have a lot of Eastern teams they got to play down the stretch, and they could have a say in who does or doesn't make the playoffs in the East, which feels unusual. But anyways, Pittsburgh, 55 games, the lowest number of games left, or lowest number of games played, right? 60 points. But it means that between now and the end of the season, which is in 51 days, they've got 27 games. So yes, they have a lot of games in hand and all that. They're also playing 27 times in 51 days. That's a lot of hockey. So We'll see how it goes. They do have 22 regulation wins. 15 of their remaining 27 games are against playoff teams. They've got 2 against Edmonton, but they've got 3 against Columbus. Now, Columbus has shown this year they can be tough to beat. And I understand they've got a lot of losses, but most of those losses they've played pretty well. So Pittsburgh shouldn't take Columbus lightly. And, I mean, Columbus would enjoy knocking Pittsburgh out of the playoffs. Now at home, they have 12 games left. They're 15, 10, and 4 at home. They have 15 away from home, where they're 11, 11, and 4. So they're going to need to improve their road record, and they're going to need to do it starting tonight. They're in Vancouver, and then they're in Seattle, they're in Calgary, and they're in Edmonton. So again, that western swing can be tough. They come home and play Columbus, Washington, then they go on the road to Boston. They come home and play Edmonton before they go and play in Ottawa. They play at home against San Jose, the Rangers, Detroit. And then they go on the road to play New Jersey, as well as Dallas, and then Colorado. So that's the top 3 games right there. New Jersey should be fighting. Dallas and Colorado both battling it out to try to be first in their division, potentially first in the conference. And then after that road trip, Pittsburgh's at home against Carolina, Columbus. They play in Columbus, so home and home there. Before they go to New York, play the Rangers. Then they play in New Jersey. Then they play at Washington. So again, that's a 4-game road trip right there. And on that road trip, they have games against both New Jersey and Washington. So the power is still in Pittsburgh's hands. They come home and play Tampa Bay. They play in Toronto. They come home and play against Detroit, Boston, and Nashville before they finish the season in New York against the Islanders. So it is going to be interesting to see how they do and how they handle playing so many games over such a short period. And again, they're without Rust for this road trip. We know Gensel's out for a while yet. Money Puck is not too down on them at all. 35.3% chance of making the playoffs. And again, considering they're 7 points out, that's not bad. The Athletic has them at 39%. And then Hockey Reference has them at 34.9%. But I will say this, those odds have dropped, especially Athletic. The Athletic had them around like 60% not that long ago. So those odds have definitely dropped off. And by this measure, the teams that are above the playoff line, with all the models, they're saying they should stay above the playoff line. But we know it's not necessarily that simple. These odds can change from day to day. I just wanted to look at this and look at the 7 teams that are in the picture, because I do like to do this each season, usually around this time of year, and just take a look at it. I'm not looking at the West today. I may take a look at the West tomorrow. But let me know your thoughts. Which 3 of these 7 teams make the playoffs, and which 4, I should say, don't? Really basic question. It will be interesting to see how the games unfold from here. And of course, I'll be here to cover it for the next 51 days. And then after that, we've only got 16 teams left playing hockey. The other 16 go home. And I love that setup. There are some good teams on this board that are going to miss the playoffs, and that should be how it is. It shouldn't just be that a team's bad so they don't make the playoffs. It should be those teams are pretty good. They didn't quite make the playoffs. I think it makes for a more interesting product and a more interesting game. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.